Japan is not collapsing with riots, explosions, or war. It is collapsing quietly, one empty house, one closed school, and one forgotten town at a time. For decades, Japan was the country people imagined when they thought about the absolute peak of the future. We saw the bullet train slicing through the countryside at 300 kilometers per hour. We saw the neon canyons of Shinjuku and the perfect, clean streets of Ginza where everything worked with mathematical precision. It was a society that seemed organized down to the smallest detail, a first world titan that the rest of the world looked at with both envy and awe. That story is still true when you step out of a station in central Tokyo. But here is the thing, the map tells a different story. Away from the famous skylines and the tourist trails, another version of Japan is quietly taking shape, and it looks nothing like the future we were promised. In the shadows of the Japanese Alps and along the coastlines of the north, cities that were once symbols of industrial might are beginning to look like they belong to a different world entirely. We are witnessing the birth of a phenomenon that most people thought was impossible. First world cities collapsing toward third world standards. The scary part is not that these towns are simply becoming old. The scary part is that the basic infrastructure of modern life is starting to fail. In some of these regions, the paved roads are being reclaimed by nature because there are no longer enough taxpayers to fund the repairs. Water mains that burst are left leaking for days because the local government has run out of workers. Hospitals are closing their doors not because they lack technology, but because they have no doctors left to staff them and no children being born to fill the maternity wards. The buildings are still there, the roads are still there, and the schools are still there, but the people are not. This is the end of an era for the Japanese miracle. We are looking at 10 specific cities where the social contract has effectively broken, leaving behind a landscape of Akiya ghost houses and silent shopping districts where the only sound is the wind hitting rusted shutters. Today we are looking at how Japan became the warning sign for the rest of the developed world, and why what is happening there may soon appear on maps far beyond Japan. Japan may not be the exception, Japan may be the preview. This is the Insider Map, where the future is already breaking. To understand how Japan's most vulnerable cities reached this breaking point, you have to look back at what this country used to represent. Japan was not always a symbol of decline. After the devastation of World War II, it performed what the world called an economic miracle, rising from the ashes to become the second largest economy on the planet. This was the era of the salaryman, a time of lifetime employment, stable families, and a middle-class dream that seemed unbreakable. The cities we are discussing today, places like Yubari in the north, or the industrial hubs along the coast, were once the engines of this massive growth. In the 1970s and 80s, these streets were packed with young workers moving from the countryside to find their fortune in the factories and mines. There were new schools being built every year, high-speed rail lines connecting the map, and a feeling that the Japanese dream would last forever. For a while, the promise worked. People bought homes, filled the local shops, and invested in a future where tomorrow would always be larger and wealthier than today. Then the math changed. The problem did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, hidden behind the neon lights of the big cities. It began in the early 1990s when the great asset bubble burst, leading Japan into what is now known as the lost decades. Suddenly, the economic engine that had powered the country for 40 years simply stopped growing the way people expected. But the financial stall was only the first domino. Beneath the surface, a much more dangerous shift was taking shape, a demographic collapse. As the economy stagnated and job security vanished, the social contract began to fray. Young people faced with rising costs and uncertain futures delayed marriage. Then families had fewer children. The birth rate dropped below the level needed to replace the population, and the math of a functioning society began to fail. A country built for growth cannot function when its population starts to shrink. This demographic crisis created a massive internal migration. The young people who were left didn't stay in the industrial or rural cities. They migrated to Tokyo, seeking the last remaining scraps of opportunity and leaving their hometowns to age in silence. This left behind a landscape of leftover cities, places that were built for 100,000 people but now house only 20,000. The workers left, then the children disappeared, and eventually the tax base evaporated. Without tax revenue, these cities could no longer maintain the massive infrastructure they had built during the boom years. Schools started losing their students, then their teachers, and eventually their reason to exist. And once the math changed, the map started changing with it. The crisis was no longer just a set of statistics in a government report. It had become a physical reality. It was a slow-motion transition where first world architecture began to rot because there simply wasn't enough money or people to keep the lights on. The easiest way to understand Japan's crisis is not to start with the national numbers. It is to look at the map and see the places where the crisis has become physical. When you leave the gravity of Tokyo and head into the old industrial heartlands or the remote coastal regions, you realize that a declining birth rate is not an abstract concept. It is a physical reality that you can see and touch. A closed elementary school in a mountain town is not just a building. It is a sign that the local future has been cancelled. You can see playgrounds where the swings are rusted and classrooms where the clock stopped years ago, serving as silent museums of a generation that never returned. This is where the quiet collapse is hidden in plain sight. In the 10 cities we are examining, the housing crisis has reached a point of urban decay in slow motion. An empty home, an Akiya, is not just a property. It is a sign that someone left, someone died, or someone inherited a life they no longer want to return to. Millions of these houses are standing today with furniture still inside and family photos still on the walls, but with no clear future owner willing to maintain them. In some neighborhoods, these ghost houses are so common that they create entire blocks of rot, pulling down the value of everything around them until the map itself begins to look like a patchwork of abandonment. The map tells a different story than the one of neon lights and high-speed trains. On these streets, the local stores might keep their lights on, but the feeling of growth has quietly disappeared. We are seeing the rise of shutter towns, places where the main shopping districts are nothing but rows of closed metal gates that haven't been opened in a decade. In these communities, the youngest regular customer at the local grocer may already be in their 50s. You see cities that were meticulously planned and built for a massive, thriving population now trying to function with less and less every year. This is what happens when a first world nation begins to lose its grip on the basic infrastructure of modern life. It is a country trying to maintain yesterday's infrastructure with tomorrow's population missing. In the most affected areas, the local government is forced to make impossible choices. They are trying to maintain roads, schools, hospitals, and public services in towns that were built for thousands more people than they have left. It starts with a pothole that never gets filled because the tax base has evaporated. Then it becomes a bridge that is closed permanently because a repair is too expensive for a town with no young workers. Eventually, whole sections of the city are effectively left to nature. The buildings are still there, but the people are not. Behind every one of these empty houses, there is a human consequence. A family that moved to the big city, leaving an elderly parent behind who eventually passed away in a house that no one wants. This is not just a local problem. In these 10 cities, the warning signs are everywhere. The map isn't just changing, it is being erased, one street at a time. This is what collapse looks like when it happens with a clean street and a silent train station. What makes Japan's crisis so important is that it does not look like the end of the world. It is not a scene of burning buildings or chaotic streets. Instead, it looks organized. It looks clean. It looks quiet, and that is exactly why so many people miss it. This is what collapse looks like when it happens quietly. It does not break all at once. It simply empties out slowly. A shrinking country does not only lose its population, it loses the very foundation of its society. It loses workers to staff its factories, taxpayers to fund its infrastructure, and caregivers to look after an aging population that is living longer than any generation in history. It loses students, local businesses, and eventually the confidence that tomorrow will be larger or better than today. When a city loses its young people, it loses its ability to imagine a future. The result is a nation of leftover places where the only thing growing is the number of empty lots and the silence in the streets. The scary part is that Japan is not an outlier. Japan is the first clear map of a future that many of the world's richest countries are already walking toward. The same mathematical trap, the combination of aging populations, falling birth rates, and rural abandonment is already spreading far beyond the borders of Japan. We can see the same pattern starting to emerge in the ghost towns of Italy and the shrinking industrial hubs of Germany and Spain. We see it in the declining rural regions of Eastern Europe and even in parts of the United States, where small-town economies are being hollowed out by the same forces. The math of the 20th century was built on the assumption of infinite growth and a young, expanding workforce. But the 21st century is revealing a different reality. The map is beginning to show us that the era of expansion is over for much of the developed world. In these 10 Japanese cities, we aren't just looking at a local tragedy or a unique economic failure. We are looking at a preview of what happens when a society runs out of time. Japan may not be the exception, Japan may be the warning sign. It is a country trying to find a way to survive in a world that is quietly shrinking. The buildings will remain and the streets may stay clean, but the map is telling us that the world we knew is fading away. The question is no longer if this will happen elsewhere, but who will be the next to face this silent collapse. Drop a comment and tell me which country you think is next. Subscribe for more maps like this every week. This is the Insider Map, where the future is already breaking.